why don't you get government-backed loans to start your own business at that age instead?
School teaches you how to be a good employee. It doesn't teach you how to run your own business.
That's how you get taxed to fuck.
Yeah.
Right? The biggest tax hack that's available in the UK is being an entrepreneur, because you pay yourself first.
You learn how to make money online. And I think that people often say the hardest pound to earn is the first one. Like once you know that you can sell something online, it's almost like an addiction.
I find myself getting obsessed with it.
When you have arguments, like how do you not let it get the better of you? And how do you do that in business?
Honesty is a massive one, but another one which I've always considered to be a skill of mine is being socially aware. Like aware when you're wrong. There is nothing worse than someone who's like, they're going to die on that hill. Like, I know people in my life, people close to me, that will have an opinion on something and you could prove them categorically wrong, but they're still going to have that opinion out of principle.
What is the key thing that you've learned from some of these people that you've either listened to or worked alongside? Guys, thanks so much for, I say joining me on the podcast today, but
Joining us.
joining you in your studio. Yeah. So thanks so much for the invite of coming up here, and thanks for also being guests, which I'm really excited about. I've seen you guys online quite a lot. So yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here recording this today. Maybe if we could just start by the two of you just sort of giving us a little bit of a background about what you both do together with the Podcasters podcast, and then we can get into the details afterwards, the backstory.
Go on, mate, you got this.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having us, even if it's in our premises. But yeah, so, well, really you should go first because you was here first, but don't worry, I'll do your dirty work.
Delegation.
Yeah. Kane was brought in to help run Progressive Media, this podcast agency, about, what was it, 4 years ago? 4 years ago. Started growing this podcast agency really quickly and then needed support. I was connected through Kane through a previous job, and then myself was brought in, and now between us we kind of manage all the clients here, help to run this podcast agency, and a big part of that has then been the Podcasters Podcast, which is our way of showing off our knowledge and kind of practicing what we preach, because it's all good us telling people how to launch podcasts, how to monetize podcasts, how to grow it, but if we're not doing it ourselves, it's a bit of a scam really, isn't it?
So you got the data there in the background as well to basically back up what you are telling people.
Yeah, I think so. The agency's been around since January 2016. The first show was Rob Moore's, at the time, Disruptive Entrepreneur. Then we rebranded to Disruptors. And it sort of was doing okay for a few years. I joined in 2020 during lockdown. And I believe we're the largest podcast agency for independent creators. There's a lot of like branded ones that would do stuff for BBC or big corporates or whatever. We always deal with indie creators. We're definitely, I think, the first. Sort of 2016 was really early. And the podcast didn't come around until 2021, November 2021. So it's like, was doing it for other people for quite a lot of years. And then there felt like a bit of a disconnect between like, we're teaching other people and sort of preaching this, because not only do we have the podcast agency, we've got like an information business as well. So for those that can't afford to hire an agency or employees, like, we'll just learn how we do it, right? And we used to run like an online course through lockdown and stuff, and it just seemed really icky. I don't know, and it kind of like, I've got to do this. So in November 2021, we launched the podcast, essentially implementing everything that we tell other people to do. And it's like, oh yeah, this stuff does work. That's good. It's really good to know.
It's a real niche as well to go out there and interview podcasters. So you've got a podcast that is going out there and interviewing other podcasters, which is quite cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the main things we teach for independent creators, right? If you haven't got a massive following or millions in the bank, you have to start niche, because you can leverage other people's communities. Like anytime I talk on stage, I use the same example, but it's like, if you've got a marketing podcast, it's like, well, who is that for? Is that for Fortune 500 companies? Is that for mum and pop shops? Is it old school PR, or is it digital? Like, it's so broad of a term, and like your advice won't please everyone, like, because depending on where you are. But if you've got a marketing podcast for salon owners, it's like, and I ask people, well, where would you go to promote it? And you get all the same answers. Well, I could do door to door. Exactly. You could go to salons if you really wanted to. But is there Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, trade shows, events where salon owners all congregate?
Yeah.
So even if you have no following, somebody has already put in the blood, sweat, and tears to build a community, either online or in person. And when you go, oh, I've got a podcast for this really niche community, chances are you're one of one. Like at the time, there wasn't, I don't think, another podcast about podcasting, maybe one or two in the States, but definitely not over here. It's like, if we used to work with like a fly fishing podcast, or somebody who was like an enthusiast for artwork on IPA cans, super niche stuff. But it's like, you're the only one. And on a planet with 8 billion people connected by the internet, it's like, there's no such thing as niche. You can find 20,000 weirdos that love the same stuff as you, like quite easily. So that is one of the biggest things, is like niche down, and we did that, and it is paying off.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I work in the wealth management industry, and one of my favorite companies to own is Warhammer.
Yes.
Games Workshop. And like, every single time I look at this stock, I'm like, how on earth do we have, how on earth does the company continue to grow? And it's because there is a real hardcore following of people that are just every year they continue to buy and buy and buy. And it's just like, yeah, it's a niche company that sells a niche product, but it is so profitable as well.
And now I was going to say, when you come in to monetize a podcast or sell your own products, the more well it's aligned, the more you can sell it for. And I think, I don't know if it was Hormozy or it might have been Daniel Priestley, or I heard someone talk about, you can sell the same product, but make it for more of a specific person, and you could sell it for way more, right? So if you sell business coaching, it's like, oh, there's 1,000,001 business coaches. You probably can't price it that highly. If you sell business coaching for people who train dog trainers, all of a sudden you can charge a lot more because it's specific and it's relevant to them. You're giving the exact same advice, but you're just framing it specifically to their business. So the more specific you make your offer, usually the more you can charge for it. So then when you come, like I say, to a niche podcast, you've got a really passionate audience who care all about the same thing. And if they see you as an expert in the space, and you can provide a product which aligns perfectly with what they need, and there's not another one, you're probably going to be able to add a zero on to what the generic version of that product would be.
Yeah, and actually for most people, it's trying to identify those niches. But often it comes from things like passion. But just before we get into like the sort of the details around the sort of the monetizing or whatever, and the brand side, but can we just jump into your backgrounds a little bit? Because I'd love to understand how you got into this yourselves. Like, for example, Kane, what was your background before this? Did you do like university? Did you, you know, what did you want to be when you were younger? What did you want to do when you grew up?
Damn. So from age 10 to 20, I wanted to be a lawyer. And I remember that very distinctly from, I was in year 6 and there was like a careers assembly, and one of the mums come in and had like a nice Range Rover and said she went on 3 holidays a year. I was like, I'm in. That literally from like 11, I'm like, cool, that's the one. And then that was right up until the end of my second year at uni, where I was like, this is fucking miserable. Like,
did you study law at university?
Yeah. So I went all the way through. So I picked all my GCSEs and A levels like for that goal. I did work experience every school holiday from year 10 through sixth form, all in law firms. Yeah, man. And it was kind of enjoyable up until that last one. But like after your law degree, you have like 3 further years of training. And one of them is called your training contract, and you have to do that in a firm, and they sponsor you and whatever. And it's so competitive. And the reason I did so much work experience is because I would say I wasn't the brightest academically, but I'm happy to put hours in. And I was way more hands-on than I was academic. So it's like, oh, maybe if I do this and I work in loads of firms, they'll fall in love with me and I'll get a training contract. And then I was there, and there was a 29-year-old who went to the same uni as me. She was, I would have said, more intelligent. And she was still in the mailroom, right, at 29. So she finished uni at 21. She did her postgrad for a year to 22. And from 22 to 29, she was waiting for this firm to give her 2-year training program. And she was still in the mailroom, like, oh, it's this is the year. And I was like, and it was, I remember it was the Christmas holidays at uni. And it was literally like my ghost of Christmas future. I was like, oh, fuck this. Like, yeah, there is no money in this. And then I looked into it more. I was like, oh yeah, unless you're really lucky and you work your way up like a big London firm, like the only way you make money in law is if you own your own firm. So I was like, the lesson isn't law, the lesson is business owner. So I was like, this is stupid. And throughout uni, to pay for just rent and food, I started off as a club rep in my first year, did that for a while, and then me and my friend sort of thought, well, this seems really easy. Why are we doing it for like £15 an hour or £10 an hour? I think it was, probably worse than that. It's probably about 10 quid an hour or something like that. It's like, this is bullshit. Let's just run our own events. Like, it's mostly just flyers and door knocking, and we know everyone, all the students anyway. So we did that, and we made pretty good money. So I got into like marketing and sales and events and all these things. It's like, okay, this is way more fun than law. I want to do this. So for a moment, I thought maybe events, or maybe I wasn't really too sure. But before I went to university, I used to work at Costa around the corner, actually, in the coffee shop. And there was a regular that would be there like every morning. We'd open at 5, he'd be there at 5 to 5 every morning. He'd beat me there if I was opening. And he would come round, like one day it'd be a Porsche, then it'd be a retro Ferrari, then a Lamborghini.
Interesting.
You know, and it's a different supercar every day of the week. His name's Rob Moore from Disruptors, I mentioned earlier. So then when I sort of fell out of love with law, I finished my university degree, but I was like, I'm not going to do this. So I just messaged him on Instagram saying like, here's what I've been doing with the event stuff. Like, I know you've got like a training and events company. Like, do you need a marketing person, a sales person? Like, what do you need? And that just so happened to be the time that the podcast stuff was getting more busy. He didn't want to run an agency because he hired all these staff to fulfill his podcast. And then a bunch of people in his inner circle, friends, acquaintances, wanted to launch their own. So he was like, oh, pay me X and you can have the spare time from my staff. And that basically was the inception of Progressive Media. But he didn't want to run that. He already had other businesses. He'd retired from those. Podcasting was essentially his retirement. It was like, now I've got people to manage. Like, fuck this. So I messaged him at like the exact right time.
Wow.
That he was like battling with this thing of, I don't want to run this, but there's money and an opportunity here. Here you go. So I came in as an employee for my first year or so, just looking after clients, learning more about the podcast space, spending a lot of time with their marketing team, production team, just learning the ropes of podcasting. And, that's stuff that they developed and tested and spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on from sort of 2016 to 2020. And then once I sort of got to know the industry a bit, we grew the agency massively. I think we went from 20 or 30 clients to about 120 in just over a year, something like that. So we grew really quickly. And then I bought in. I left employment. I sort of had a conversation with Rob to say, like, I don't want to be an employee anymore. I want to go do my own thing. And he countered me and basically said, well, you can own a piece of the pie, but you carry on managing things.
Wow.
And that brings us to today.
What a sliding doors moment.
Yeah.
Meeting this guy, just working, because you don't realize where these opportunities come from. So network is something that's come up so much on the podcast. But working in a coffee shop is what created your initial network essentially. But were you having conversations with him when he was coming in? Like, you were interested in him and those sorts of things?
Yeah. So, one, because he come in different cars all the time.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
yeah.
What does this guy do?
It's like those the things on TikTok when the guys are like going up to the people in the random cars.
Yeah.
What do you do for a job? Yeah.
Pretty much that was the case. And then he said, and he'd be like, oh, I'm doing this podcast and, I'm going to London. He'd be up really early. So I'm going to London. We're going to go interview David Goggins or going to interview like this person or this person. I'm like, oh, that's fucking cool. But at that time, so I was like 16, 17, 18. So that was sort of before going to uni. I didn't really think too much about the whole podcasting side. I was like, oh, that's cool, you're meeting these people. But I never really thought about podcasting again whilst at university. Just like, he spends his time doing what he wants and he's rich as fuck. I was like, that's what I want to do, right? And I just focused on that bit. And so then when I messaged him, he was like, yeah, cool. Like, come do this.
Awesome. That's just quickly as well, actually, what does your background compare to this?
It's a bit different. I definitely didn't get a law degree, I can tell you that for free. I've done a bit of all sorts. So I was the first, before when I was maybe 14, 15, I've always had that kind of entrepreneurial side because I was going to car boot sales, buying things, selling them on eBay. That was my first, like, being a salesperson, if you want. After that, I started doing match betting, which sounds really rogue.
At what age?
Yeah, 18.
Yeah, sure.
All my accounts from my mum's email. Because that was like a way you could make guaranteed like 50, 60 pound a week, and all these little ideas I come up with. And then I've done a bit of Forex trading. I think I was 18 at this point, maybe. And then I ended up becoming a football coach. So after school, I'd done a football scholarship. My manager there then went to start his own football, basically college program, the same thing, and employed me as an apprentice straight out of being one of the students. So I was 18 trying to coach 20, 16-year-olds, which was rather difficult. But I love football, and I owe a lot to him, to be fair. He was really, really useful in my journey. But that time made me realise, okay, I love football, but I'm not enjoying the coaching element of it. I was also doing coaching in schools, which children, not for me. They were just annoying. So I was going from, okay, I'm running a session with 20, 16-year-olds, and me at 18, I looked about 14. So actually, I probably looked younger than most of the people I was trying to take control of, and trying to have authority over them was rather difficult. And then I went from that to running an after-school dodgeball club for a load of 7-year-olds who were only at the dodgeball club because their parents couldn't pick them up on time. None of them wanted to be there. So it was a bit tough. So then he actually sent me on a social media course to learn how to run the social media a bit better. So I was going to do that for his company. On that it was with John Lee. And it wasn't what we expected it to be. It was all about business, social media and business, and actually like Amazon selling or drop shipping, all this sort of stuff. And that really got me interested in starting my own business. So I then started drop shipping. Within 6 months, I was doing that full time. I quit that job. At this point, I am actually 18. So now I'm 18. I've quit my job. I'm full time drop shipping, doing quite well, but it was very up and down. I'd done that for like 2 years. And then because of inconsistencies, then Apple changed the way that Facebook ads worked. I stopped doing it full time. In that time, I think I spent about probably 150, 200,000 pounds of my own money on Facebook ads.
Wow.
Where I didn't have that money in the bank, but it was drop shipping. So someone buys from me.
Yeah.
I ship direct from China to them. So I run a Facebook ad. They click the ad to my website that I create. They buy the sunglasses, let's call it. I used to sell a lot of sunglasses. The sunglasses from me. I send that file to an agent in China, or I have it connected to AliExpress, and they ship the product directly to the customer. I'm buying it for £10, selling it for 30, maybe £10 of ad cost in between, making £10 profit. That was generally how I done it. All sorts of different products. Done that for a couple of years. It was very up and down, but then things got tough with ads. So I started selling windows, and that's actually where I met Kane. So you mentioned the network thing.
Yeah.
I think me and him went out on a couple of appointments together at the start and got to know each other a little bit. We both left selling windows. I went back to doing that again, and then an opportunity came up here because I went for I think it was just a drink with Kane, and he was like, "Yeah, like I'm really busy. I need support." So I came here for an interview to kind of support with the podcast stuff. Went really well, and then on the way out, happened to walk past John Lee, who is the guy who actually ran the seminar that first got me into social media and everything, into this world, which was a really weird moment because I hadn't seen him since, hadn't heard of him since, and he just happened to be walking outside the building as I've walked out of my interview, thinking he's the reason this thing whole starts, and this whole thing started about 3 years ago, and he had no idea, obviously.
That's fascinating how these things actually happen and how small the world is. But Kane, going back to your story there, I've got so much I could resonate that with. I think I did a podcast where I was a guest and I spoke about this, and my girlfriend was the host of that one. And I think this happens to a lot in schools where you are sort of given these career pathways to go down, and it's like lawyer, accountant, doctor, or whatever. And I went down the legal pathway too.
Interesting.
And I went into work in law, and I fucking hated it.
Nice.
So what you're saying is I've made the right decision.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I actually advocate now to people. And one of the purposes of this podcast is to sort of give people an entire spectrum of things to look at and say, you don't have to just choose these traditional, routes that, as you said, that someone's parent came in, driving a nice car, had a few holidays a year. There is so much available to you now. And now that the cost of university, for example, is so high, how much benefit do you get out of that? And that's one of the things that I'm really trying to sort of unpick and then just sort of open people's perspectives up a little bit and say there are a wide range of different jobs, careers, businesses that you can start. And I'm like you both as well, that I want to have my own business. I don't at the moment, but it will happen at some point. It's like figuring out my speciality and these sorts of things. But yeah, it's just funny how you go down that route from when you're literally, I was in my early teens, and that's when I saw on like the careers page or whatever it was, you know, a lawyer is a good career. So I put all of my efforts into that, and then went to work in law and hated it, and then pivoted into investment management. But yeah, it's what I guess one of like the problems, I guess, with the educational system today. And credit to you for like not going to university and sort of taking the non-traditional route, but you essentially both end up in the same place, and it just sort of shows the power of that as well.
Yeah, whole university. I was doing a podcast episode about this yesterday. Is a scam. Like, the whole thing. Like, unless you want to be a doctor, I think that is the only one. Because now I didn't know this because it was never explained to me. For accountant and lawyer, you don't have to go to university.
You don't know.
You can do it externally. And I would have thrived in doing it that way outside of university. Now, obviously, I'm glad I didn't go because I'm, doing okay, and I'm glad with the path. But unless you're a doctor, nothing else makes sense, especially business degrees or economics or anything like that. It's fucking stupid. I looked yesterday in this episode, right? The average salary of a university professor is like 40 grand or 50 grand, something like that. So I'm paying $9,000 a year plus all your other fees plus everything, like all in. I think the average debt of university students is about 40 grand.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm paying 40 grand to learn business from somebody getting paid 40 grand doesn't own a business. Like, that's stupid.
Nothing frustrates me more.
Yeah, like,
it genuinely pisses me off.
and every time I go back to my university town, I look, there's a new building. They're not in the education business. They are in the property business. The amount of money they make. And it's genius because it's like, cool, let's force all children to go to university where they're going to have a government-backed loan. They're going to pay for their rent a quarter up front, guaranteed. It's like, well, that's the best business model in the world. Like,
no wonder they're not teaching people.
But it also like raises the question, why don't you get government-backed loans to start your own business at that age instead?
Because the way that the economy works, they need employees, right?
Yeah.
They teach you, at school teaches you how to be a good employee.
Yeah.
Doesn't teach you how to run your own business.
How to memorize information
Yeah.
and be a good employee.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you're taught to do.
that's
right?
how you get taxed to fuck. Right? The biggest tax hack that is available in the UK is being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because you pay yourself first. And that was like one of the biggest drivers for me to leave employment is like, you have a good month, you work really hard. It's like national insurance.
Yeah.
Your tax, my student loans, everything. And it's like, oh, this much is for you. It's like, yeah.
Isn't it like 100, if you were, say, employed on 100 grand, to replace that salary, you only actually need to make, what, 60, 70 grand?
It's something between like 100 and 120 grand. Basically, you pay about 60% out.
You do, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you start to lose your personal allowance. So your effective tax rate in between 100 and 100 and about 125 is 60% on that earnings.
And worse if you have student loans.
And it will be worse if you have student loans, of course, yeah.
Jesus
Christ.
Christ.
And a national insurance on top. So you're not left with a lot, basically, if you're earning. And that's where, as a country, I think that we want to be more aspirational. We want to have bigger ambitions. And, you cross that threshold into the £100,000 mark. And if, for example, if you are a parent, you start to lose like child benefit allowances and those sorts of things as well. So it's a real dangerous threshold to cross into that amount.
The other thing I've noticed as well is like a few of my friends are a bit older that have children. So you might look at like a salary of, let's say, 80k or whatever and go like, that person's doing well for themselves. Like, it's a good salary. And then their partner won't work because
Total household income.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, but you're screwed because if you were both earning 40k, your take home in the household would be so much better.
Yeah.
So much better. But it's not. It's like one person has to look after the child or children and the other person's on their 80k salary, done pretty well, worked themselves up. And it's like, after all of your deductions, you're basically left with sweet FA. It's so frustrating.
But the thing is, if people were taught how to start their own business in a more effective way by people who know what they're talking about, then realistically, those people on 80, 100, 120k, they're probably smart enough to run their own business, but they probably just don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So if those people had the knowledge of starting their own business, then you wouldn't have those massive taxpayers because they'd be starting their own business.
Yeah. So you actually realized this from quite a young age. Like, you started to do drop shipping and things like this. You learned how to make money online from selling products to somebody else. And I think that people often say the hardest pound to earn is the first one. Like, once you know that you can sell something online, it's almost like an addiction. Like, you just want to go more and more and more and scale it up.
I found myself getting obsessed with it. I was
Really?
like 18, the first thing I check on my phone is my Shopify store when I woke
Yeah.
up. Last
Great
night.
habit. Great habit.
It's a great habit when you're doing well, or if you it's gonna sound really sad. You can turn the notifications on. And it'll go ka-ching every time you look at it. If you're hanging out with your mates, like ka-ching, or what's that? I was just making some sales. Don't worry about it.
It's called passive income, bro.
Yeah, that's £30 in my bank. I'll sell you a course for 99 quid. But yeah, no, you do. You get obsessed with it. And what can be the hard thing, and we've definitely struggled with this, is like the shiny object syndrome. Like, oh, this new cool thing. And then you do it for about a month. You're like, oh, this other thing. And you just, all these different ideas.
Yeah, 0 to 1 is fun for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Then you need to hire somebody that's really good at 1 to 10.
Yeah.
I actually want to focus on this part for a second, because this is, from the sounds of it, what you did with Rob. So, and a question I've got is, how did you make yourself indispensable to him that you were able to go to him and say, I want to start my own business, and then he offered you a piece of the pie?
We grew very quickly. I've always been, that's such a lie. I was going to say I've always been good at sales. I got good at sales, was one thing. And so, we've both spoken about this. Like Ash is just about to move into his house in a few weeks, right? End of this month. And there's been a few niggles that have popped into the head going like, should I be doing this? Shouldn't I be doing this? Like, am I going to be able to afford to eat or whatever? But it's like, realistically, and I think I back either of us, like, we'll always be fine. Like, in person or online, like, we're always going to be able to sell a product if we believe in it. And I think if you get good at sales, like, you'll always eat. You'll always do well. The other thing is, I just always said yes. Like, a lot of entrepreneurs, Rob being one of them, is very demanding. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, because it's what is required. Like, realistically, he's got, 350 property portfolios, new developments. He's got this massive brand and all these channels and videographers and editors he's trying to manage. He's got like 14 other companies and a family. Like, he can only do that with other people. And the only way he's been able to do that is to hold all of those people to like really high standards. Realistically, he's done really well. So it's like, okay, just whatever you say, like the answer is yes. There's a really rich guy, a friend of Rob's that lives in Peterborough. His name's called Neville Wright. Do you remember the company Kiddie Care?
No.
So they were bought by Sainsbury's for like 90 million or something like that. And it started in Peterborough market, just selling like secondhand and used like prams and stuff like this. And him and his wife over the last few decades, or like over, I think it's like 80s, 90s, noughties, scaled this. And as you come in round the corner on the main parkway, there's a massive vacant building, because basically when Sainsbury's bought it, they fucked the whole company. And it was doing really well. He's probably worth maybe 100, 150 odd million. Most of the buildings on this park he owns. The Starbucks around the corner, he owns the actual building. He's got a massive portfolio. And he's got a book called Yes, Now What's the Question?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I love that.
And I remember hearing him speak when I was just sort of joined here. He was speaking at an event that Rob was hosting. And he was talking about like, he's very dyslexic. So am I. He's like, I'm not the brightest person, but I'll work hard. I was like, yeah, I can kind of resonate with that. And he was like, my biggest philosophy, and the reason I wrote the book was like, anytime somebody said anything, like if it was a customer, it's like, oh, do you do this? Yep. Figure it out. Get the money in, figure it out.
Yeah.
It's a mentor, needs a favor. It's like, yep, cool. Just always with chest say that you can do it convincingly. And then when they leave, panic and go, how the fuck am I supposed to do this? Right? Like, and that's basically what I did, was just always say yes. And I think if you're always reliable, I mean, that's the most valuable thing you can be to anyone, right? If you're always going to reliably get somebody a result and be there and show up, that's 90% of the battle. Even if you're not necessarily the smartest or whatever, like you can find somebody who's like a fucking rocket scientist, genius, but if they only say yes to helping you a third of the time, or half the time you call them, they don't answer, you're just going to stop.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is just luck. And like, to be honest, so when I look back at the story I told you at the beginning, it's like so many things had to go my way.
Yeah.
but you can sort of increase your chances of luck by being there more. And Rob did tell me a few months ago, complimented me saying like, you always say yes. And I like value that, because if you say yes, then you get more opportunities. Right. And if you keep saying no, then people stop telling you. Like, we've got friends like this. You go, oh, should we do some of this? I say, oh, I can't, with my missus, or I'm doing this. Eventually you just stop inviting them out for plans. Because if they've said no to you the last 4 Saturdays, and there's always some bullshit excuse, you go, don't even worry about it. You're no longer invited. And I think that's the same thing in business. You don't necessarily have to be the smartest, but if you're in the room a lot.
Yeah, and you actually create your own luck from saying yes to things. And I think that one thing that I've figured out from doing this podcast is you're winging it most of the time. Like when you start, you're just giving it a go and you're figuring it out as you go along, and you don't know the answers to begin with, but you're not going to start doing those things, particularly if you're working with somebody else, unless you ask for stuff to do, or if they ask you to do something, every single thing, even if you don't know how to do it, just do it. And particularly as well, Julia, when she was speaking to me, she said that one of the reasons why she's so successful is because she took problems away from her boss, as opposed to giving problems to her boss, which I thought was quite a valuable piece of it. And it's essentially resonating with what you're saying there, which is being reliable. He knows that he can contact you and you're going to do something for him.
Yeah, I have had to figure out that if something's gone south, something's gone wrong, and this isn't just Rob, just anybody, it's like, before I bring the shit to them, I always have to think like, here's what I suggest we do to fix it.
100%.
The worst people in the world, they'll be like, I moan about this, you give them a solution, and then you go, here's 10 reasons why your solution is the right. Here's blah, blah, blah. And they'll always find a way for just to sit in the negative part. And I think I'm trying to get better at this. I even sent Ash a podcast episode the other day on my first million. And basically the two hosts had got a business together and they'd sort of fallen out. And then they did a whole 45-minute episode on like how to have a long-term business partner, like how you should communicate. And I sent it to Ash saying this is really useful, but more just so like when I lose my temper, like pull me up on my shit.
Yeah.
Because like in the moment, sometimes you don't know. And I've been in some like team meetings of like our management. I'm like, I'm so sick of we can't. It's like we've had a 45-minute meeting and everything has just been what we can't do. So anybody got
anything we can do?
Any solutions like at all? Or just want to sit in like a pity party? And I found myself do this the other day and I lost my temper a little bit. I was like, oh, okay, I regret that a bit. But yeah, I think if you're always solving problems for other people, you'll go pretty far.
How you two are? You said there that you're business partners in this now, right? So it's like a relationship. So you spoke there about how do we communicate with each other? It's the same as being at home with like your boyfriend, your girlfriend, and when you have arguments, like how do you not let it get the better of you? And how do you do that in business? Because there's
I think honesty is a massive one, but another one which I've always considered to be a skill of mine is being socially aware, like aware when you're wrong. There is nothing worse than someone who's like, they're going to die on that hill. Like, I know people in my life, people close to me that will have an opinion on something and you could prove them categorically wrong, but they're still going to have that opinion out of principle. And I think from spending a lot of time around people like that, I've then gone, okay, I'm going to be the opposite. So I'll go into any conversation with Kane, with anyone, like, here's an opinion, and we can have a debate about something. But if it gets to the point where I will always be open to their angle and try and see it from that side. And if it gets to the point where they make a point that makes me go, okay, no, you're right. No shame. Like, no, that makes sense. You're right. And loads of people struggle to do that. And I think you do that quite well as well, but there's a lot of people who don't. And speaking to those people is just frustrating because you're just like, this ends in one of two ways. Either we don't agree because I'm right, or I realize I'm wrong, and then you win, if you like. And in their head, they're like, I win all the time because it's horrible. It's no fun to speak to those kind of people.
I spoke louder. I won the argument.
Yeah, literally. So I think just being not letting ego get in the way and be like, yeah, cool, like, I'm wrong, you're right, and being open to things as well helps, and honesty. But yeah, just being socially aware, I'd see it as a big quality of mine because I've spent a lot of time with people that aren't like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to be like that. And then that's every kind of job role or opportunity I've had in my life has been down to relationships and people I know nothing to do with education. I nearly went to uni. I was accepted to a sports science degree in Cambridge and didn't. They called me up. It's like, you haven't turned up. And this was like a few months after the term started. I was like, yeah, I'm not going. I went into the apprenticeship route instead because I had a relationship with the person, my coach, and he really liked me as a person and employed me as essentially as his apprentice.
So you had an offer from Cambridge.
It was not the Cambridge.
Not the
Cambridge.
Cambridge.
No. Anglia Ruskin.
Okay.
But it was a sports science degree, and I was going to go and do that. And then I was like, no, I want to go and do the thing. And it was football coaching. And my trajectory because of that has definitely been far better than it would have been had I spent thousands studying sports science. And I'm very confident I would not be still doing that. If that was what I studied.
Do you think that you would have ended up doing this, even if you did that?
No, but purely because I probably wouldn't have met the right people. So it's a weird way. I think it's called the butterfly effect, like little tiny things that make a massive decision. Me making that decision to go be a football coach led to me being in that room with John Lee, which led to me starting a dropshipping business, which then led to me looking to get in a sales job to help support. So I thought, let me go into sales because that's going to relate to this entrepreneurial stuff I'm doing, which is where I met Kane, which is then how I've ended up here. So like nothing would have happened if I decided, like that whole route would have been completely different had I decided to go to university.
And we often think that life is this linear line. You know, you just make these incremental progressions or whatever, but it isn't. You go off in all these different directions. You meet people here, and they might be your boss in the future and things like this. You don't. I think that the one thing that I've learned from my career and also from my childhood as well, wanting to be a lawyer, is that life doesn't always work out as you had it planned.
I always see it as like, you know, when you get a new video game, like you get GTA or whatever, like the map is grayed out until you like go and explore that bit. I think careers are a little bit like that. Like my girlfriend at the moment is like very much stuck in her job. She doesn't know what to do. It's like, but you kind of need to leave what you're in because you're in your environment. So you only see the same people talk about the same things. You don't know what's available. Like had I have not got that job at Costa, I wouldn't have met Rob. If I hadn't joined, started working with Rob, I wouldn't have known about so many different business opportunities. Like the whole podcast industry, I wouldn't have known anything about. I would have known nothing about property investing. I wouldn't have known anything to do with information businesses and webinars and selling online and all these different things. Like you meet this person, they introduce you to this person, they introduce you to this person. It's like, and then suddenly you see more options available to you, and then you're sort of better suited to going, I think I would like this, or I think I would like this. Whereas when you just stay stationary and you just see the same people talking about the same bullshit every day, and it's really easy to think that there's no other career options for me.
Yeah.
So realistically, 10 years ago, social media manager didn't exist.
Yeah, literally.
Joe, and there's so many niche ways people make money that we see just through podcasting. Like, for example, that we worked with the podcast that does like recruitment in the mining industry. You'd have had no idea that was like a 7-figure a year business.
Yeah.
It's like insane.
I was at a wedding the weekend, and one of the guests there was he's a recruitment agent for high level like CEOs of defense companies. So he flies all over the world to basically meet these people. But like that is his niche. It is only board members and CEOs of defense companies, and he's like the number one in the world now because it's not a very big industry to be recruiting for. But he's the specialist. He's the expert.
Oh, he's earning a whack.
It's funny. You see his Instagram, and if he's listening to this, he'll be laughing right now. But he's always just putting up. All the time. He's just flying first class everywhere in the world. And it's like to me, it's either on holiday all the time. He's always at beach clubs, whatever, but he's also doing this serious job where he's meeting these people in person, and he's being flown off to all these exotic locations because his industry, whilst he lives in Miami, his job is global. He is the number one person to go to in the world, which is mad.
But you met a yacht dealer, didn't you? Or
Interesting.
Yeah. He was. We were going to look at working with him on a podcast. He ended up not doing it in the end, but yeah, just seeing, like, getting a little insight to a whole different industry. You're like, wow, didn't even know this.
What was his cut?
Like 10% on both ends. So if he was a broker for someone buying a yacht, you get 10%. But if he was a broker for the person selling it, you'd get 10% from them as well. Wow. Or the company would get that, and then he'd get a cut of that. It worked out like, I think he'd get basically £250,000 for selling a yacht, a small yacht. And you're like, wow. That's ridiculous. And then obviously his clients, and the reason I was quite upset he didn't start the podcast in the end is his clients are people buying yachts. They're the people you want to interview on a podcast.
I mean, like,
he's like, I'll give you a bit of discount if you come on my show. But yeah,
I'll do his podcast for him.
Yeah. I did say so. I was like, so how did you get into that role? And he was, it was a long, hard trek to get there. So I was like, oh no, I'll pass. But it was, it was
Seems
an
difficult.
interesting
It's not for me.
I'll stick to this. But yeah, there's so much out that you just don't kind of realize until you're exposed to it, and you've got to just take that leap, haven't you?
100%. And that's one thing I guess that you guys have realized from doing the podcast is that how many different things are out there. And I guess that leads us quite nicely into the next question, which is, now that you've been exposed to this world, I would say that from the outside looking in, when I first started this podcast, a couple of people pushed back and said, everyone's podcasting now. But what do you, first of all, what do you think about that point? But what do you think about the opportunity in the space for podcasting in multiple different ways, like for individuals, growing brands, for companies, for example, having an online presence? What is it about podcasts that you are loving at the moment?
There's a few things. So my favorite podcast called My First Million, business podcast, and they talk about one chart businesses, and it comes from the story of how Amazon was founded. And the numbers won't be exactly right, I can't recall properly, but it was along the lines of Jeff Bezos saw that the internet usage from 1 year to the next went up 20,000%, and it was like, cool, that is the only chart that matters, no other information supporting it. He's like, you must be on the internet if you want to become wealthy. And obviously, you know how that story ends. Similar thing in podcasting is the amount of money that's being spent just on advertisers alone, let alone from a big way podcasters make money is through their audience, through membership and merch. Exclude all that, which is actually the bulk of the industry. Just advertising was $1 billion in 2021, $2 billion in 2022, $4 billion in 2023. That's just the US, doubling.
Wow.
So it's that's the chart. That's the only one that matters. And then there's only 400,000 active podcasts today.
400,000?
Yeah, globally.
Aren't there 3 million podcasts?
4 million ever, and 400 are active. Most of them started in lockdown. They did a few episodes from home on Zoom because they were bored. So 90% of podcasts make it to episode 3. Of the 10% that remain...
Wait, 90% don't make it to episode 3.
Sorry, yeah. 90% of podcasts don't make it to episode 3. Of the 10 that remain, 90% of them don't make it past episode 20. So if you've been podcasting for 6 months, you are in the top 1% of people that have ever done it. And you go, oh...
Well done, Jay.
Yeah, I'm going to say, and that's not going to change my LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's not what I'm going to say, yeah. Well, because here's the other thing, right? You go 4 million, even if there was 4 million, I still wouldn't call it competitive. There's 65 million active YouTube channels today. Active, consistently posting content.
Wow.
So starting a podcast today with 400,000 is the same as starting a YouTube channel in 2009. And no fucker was saying in 2009, why are you starting a YouTube channel because it's too competitive? They were saying, why are you starting a YouTube channel? There's no money in it. So why has the narrative changed even though there's just as much competition? The reason is because all the big business influencers or influencers in the health space or whatever space have podcasts because they know that's where the money is and that's where the influence is. So you can scroll through Instagram and TikTok and be like, podcast clip. Everyone's got a podcast. Like, no. It's just the same 200 really influential people have got a podcast. And it's like, they're not influential and they have a podcast. They have a podcast. That's why they're influential. So
oh, wow. Yeah.
Do you know, I don't want to shit on him because I haven't achieved what he has. But if you look at Stephen Bartlett, right? Yeah. Number 1 business podcast in the country, number 1 podcast in the country, on Dragon's Den, right, really young. But obviously how much he said he sold his company for wasn't actually accurate. He sort of gave the valuation of the company that bought him. Basically, his sale was about 6 million. I meet people that have sold their companies for many, many times that, every day. Just through, in this building. I see people that are considerably richer than that.
A lot of my clients.
Yeah. Right? Exactly. That you see all the time.
Yeah.
And nobody would know who they are. They're
they don't.
Completely under the radar. But because he's got a podcast interviewing other business people, he is now positioned as, and he's, podcasts like the music industry has a chart. It has a category. So he's the number 1 business podcast in the country. One of the biggest business podcasts in the world, talking to the biggest entrepreneurs in the world. So he is credible by association. And that is enough for him to get on Dragon's Den, so the US Shark Tank, even though he sold his company. And again, it sounds like I'm shitting on him because I haven't achieved that, right? And he's got a much bigger brand and he's much richer than I am. But the point that I'm taking away from that is through the power of podcasting, he's become influential that has then led him to open all these doors. And now I guarantee it that he's probably getting approached by people left, right, and center to invest in companies.
Of course, yeah.
Before we started filming, you was talking about Tim Ferriss, right? He gets all of his money from companies he's invested in. Like his brand does well, like a few million, but he's worth well over 9 figures because people like Uber approached him really early, right? And I think there's a few others, maybe Ring, or a few other these sort of tech companies the last 15 years approached him to go, would you like to invest? You build those brands or a strong personal brand like that, then these opportunities open and then the influence comes later. So that's my rant. No, it's not competitive. It's not too late. It's early.
To add to the numbers you were giving, I think the last quarter was the first time since 2021 the number of active podcasts has gone up.
It's been falling.
Yeah, remaining the same because for every one that starts, one stops. And you made the point of people being like, oh, everyone's got a podcast. No, it's just a few. But if you think, oh, I know 4 or 5 people who've got a podcast, you probably know 4 or 5 people who have had a podcast. How many of them are still uploading?
True.
Because loads of people launch a podcast. Most of them don't make it past a couple of episodes. If you look at people who are actually active and been doing it a while, then you probably don't know many people in that space. There's a few massive ones. And that's why if there's someone doing that exact thing, it's not a great idea to try and replicate them. You don't want to be the next Stephen Bartlett. You want to be the first you. So if you're going to have a unique angle to your show, something that makes it a bit different and have a unique hosting style and be very authentic, you can get people to buy into yourself and be the first you, not someone else, because that's where you do fall into the trap of it being congested when you're trying to replicate someone else who's doing it better than you. Now put yourself in the listener's shoes. Why on earth are they going to listen to you? If you try and do Stephen Bartlett's show on a smaller scale, why would someone listen to your show and not his?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a little bit different in the way you do it, and maybe you have a unique hosting style or unique kind of way you run the show, that can then make you stand out and you hit a different audience. So if it's congested, it's your own fault, essentially. You're trying to do the same as someone else. If you look at the numbers, it's not. Sponsorships doubling year on year. Listeners are going up, but only this last quarter have the amount of actual podcasts gone up. And listeners is going up considerably as well, like a very steady growth going up. So it's a case of this last quarter's like, oh, it's finally catching up, because it was only a matter of time before money spent's going up, listeners is going up. Well, the amount of content has to go up at some point because it's not going to be like that forever. Otherwise, every single person podcasting is just going to get rich and no one else is going to do it.
This is a really interesting point because a few years ago, not many people I knew listened to podcasts. It was always music. I know people now that listen to podcasts in the gym.
Yeah, I do.
I do too, but I'm like, 10 years ago, I would have been in there putting like some proper
So
like
heavy metal.
yeah, literally. And like trying to get like, now I listen to voices are almost like providing I guess it's a bit like white noise, I guess, in the end, because if you're I don't know, that's the way I see it, but also I love those sort of inspirational conversations. Sometimes I've even sat in the gym and like rewound the section. I was listening to that but not 100%.
Yeah.
That was an amazing
I do that
segment.
when driving. I'm like, oh shit, I've missed the whole last 20 minutes.
But like so many people now that I know are now listening to podcasts that didn't before, and are now listening to it more than music.
Yeah.
Now, and this is a big shift. But for me, like when I'm talking to people about my podcast, I feel like there's a segment of people, those who listen to podcasts, I'm trying to convert them to listen to my podcast. I'm actually not bothering with the trying to convert music listeners to podcast listeners.
No, you don't.
But I think that they will naturally be converted over time. I was out for dinner with people recently, and some my friends' dad and friends were there as well. And they were like, oh yeah, I really want to start listening to podcasts. I've heard really good things about it. And there's an entire market that's completely untapped out there.
I think with those, it's like one guest on a mainstream show will convert someone. Like if there's somebody, and it generally tends to be like people that are a bit older, they don't listen to podcasts, but there's somebody like a celebrity, somebody really well known that they love, right? Could be like an old football player from like their day or whatever. And you go, you haven't really heard much of that. And everyone I've spoken to that's sort of been converted, that tends to be it. It's like, oh yeah, I never listened to them. And then I listened to such and such guested on some podcast. And half the time they can't even name the podcast, but I went to go listen to this person and I've been hooked ever since. And that seems to be the case.
So what is it? You said there about the stats about the number of podcasts that don't continue. And I guess that consistency is a real differentiator in podcasting world. Where do people fall down? Like what is it that people are doing that, is it just like they can't be asked? Like you must know a bit more.
It's a long game, right? So if anyone's ever framed a podcast as a get-rich-quick scheme, it's very far from that.
It cost me quite a lot of money.
Yeah. So
at the moment, I need a job to pay for the podcast.
Yeah. There's two ways of doing it, either a lot of time or a lot of money. Ideally, a lot of both. So you can't just go out, record a podcast into your phone and upload it and expect it to do really well. So then people get disappointed when they upload utter dross and it's not getting millions of views, right? So there's that side of it. People get disheartened very quick and it quickly loses its like, oh, that was fun. Or people are spending a lot of money and the growth might be a bit slower, but they're seeing it grow, but it's like, oh, it's costing me a lot of money. So you ideally need that money all the time to put into it. Ideally, both, like I said. And the biggest thing is numbers on podcasts can be deceiving because you see TikToks getting millions of views or YouTube Shorts getting hundreds of thousands of views. And you think, oh, if I'm getting a few hundred listeners, then that's shit. Because if my TikTok got 100 views, that's crap. It's a completely different media form. A TikTok is something that's getting shown to you, not by choice, but just getting shown to you for anywhere between 0.1 seconds and probably 30 seconds. A podcast listener is someone who's taking an hour of their day to consume what you're saying and actively choosing that. 100 podcast listeners, and we know podcasts that have a couple of hundred listeners an episode, no more than that are making six figures. And there's TikTokers out there with millions of subscribers making absolutely fuck all. Because the value of a podcast audience is so far superior to any other media audience. But if you don't know that, then it can be deceiving. And it's actually kind of almost like a new business venture for us, is we're trying to help podcasters that have really valuable audiences, but they're not entrepreneurs, they're not business people. And they don't really realize the value of their audience to say, no, you've got something there that's worth a lot of money. Oh, but I didn't think my 10,000 listeners was that much because YouTubers have this much or Joe Rogan has this much. No. Like, you should be making a lot of money with that sort of audience if it's an actual podcast audience.
We always say who, not how many. For example, I would kick a small child for a podcast with 2,500 listeners because there's 2,500 billionaires in the world. You can't tell me if you didn't have the ears of all 2,500 billionaires, you wouldn't be extremely rich. Realistically, it's like, I couldn't give a fuck about your 1 million download comedy podcast because it's like, who likes comedy? Well, everyone. Do you know who likes to laugh? Like, everyone. It doesn't mean anything. You can't, it's really difficult to monetize that audience. An advertiser can spray and pray and, let's just add, this ball shaver, like get Manscaped to add, maybe we'll sell some at Christmas. Whereas if you somehow had a really valuable audience, like, for example, who's the type of person to listen to a podcast about recruitment in the mining industry? Like, the right person.
Yeah.
Like, naturally, you're going to exclude people. So I think, realistically, it's a few things. It's like, it's harder than I thought it was going to be. It's not growing to the same level as their expectation, which is like what Ash said. Is like, your expectation should be much lower, but it's not the same. It's comparing apples to oranges. The other thing is they don't have to monetize it. Most podcasters think, oh, I monetize my content through sponsorship. So that's like the side salad of how you do it. You look at Hormozy, right? He is spending probably 7 figures a year on a massive team, creating hundreds of pieces of content a week across YouTube, podcasts, books, social media, like prolific. And the way he's monetizing is through private equity. Like, most people, I mean, this is more your world, right? But a lot of people that work in private equity will be pitching companies to say, like, I think we could help you. I think we could do it. Like, can we invest? Blah, blah, blah. So he gets 30,000 companies a month message him saying, please, can you invest?
Wow.
And most of those are non-monetary, i.e. they get a percentage for his help, his information. So he's able to scale acquisition.com, which is his private equity firm, to over 100 million in its first year or 2 years, it might have been, purely by creating all of this content to his audience. And now he's blown up, but it didn't start that way. He spent millions on this content. He's not looking for an advertiser. He doesn't want Squarespace to sponsor his podcast because he can get, I don't know, some chain of dentists in Utah that he can invest and get half of their business, and he make 10 million a year from that. So some people play a different game.
Yeah. And again, Stephen Bartlett is one of these. He's got a fund, a flight fund, I think it's called. And he is getting people coming to him all the time. But his audience is so large that it's about the network effect. How much, if he, we all know some of the brands that I think he's sort of come under a bit of pressure recently for not disclosing those, but how many companies have been successful, or at least they've had this big hockey stick moment because he's partnered with them as a shareholder, probably for no money in exchange. What instead he is giving them is access to the audience. Oh, have you considered this company or this like wearable or whatever?
Here's what's fascinating about him, right? Because he is the social media guy. He sold Social Chain. He's always been in social media. If you watch Dragon's Den, everyone who has got like a D2C brand who needs TikTok, they're like, we want Steven. But if you go onto his name on Instagram, in his bio is the link to all of the companies he's invested in.
Okay.
Click on them. Their social media is dog shit. They'll have like 4,000. You think, but he's the social media. Like, why? You would have thought he would have come in and given them his team and they would have these massive social... So they don't need to, because he can mention it once on his Instagram or on his podcast and their sales go like that. Same as Elon Musk, right? He can go on Joe Rogan, smoke weed for 3 hours and sell 50,000 Cybertrucks. It's like the personal brand is so powerful and it's worth it. Yeah, I'd let him or Alex invest in the company for no money down if they was going to promote it because of the pull that it has.
Yeah, the access to the audience.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourselves now to be sort of like social media specialist experts?
No. Because I feel like we know a good bit about social media, but podcast is our space and we don't want to be trying to claim we're experts in every space. Because then you just sound like jack of all trades, master of none. We consider ourselves experts in podcasts and have very good knowledge around social media and content and business as a whole, but podcast is like that one area. I didn't get my chance, so I'm going to rewind. My point. Go get your I was like, God, I'm waiting for you to finish. The point you were making about the sponsorship, a very tangible way of putting it is we have sponsorship, I'm not going to say figures, but the amount they pay us for the amount of listeners we have is probably 20 times the average podcast sponsorship. So very, very lucrative deal on our end. They, by the way, have made profit from it because we're so amazing at delivering an ad read. But that makes up maybe 10% of the revenue our podcast earns. So our sponsor, who sponsored us for a while, every single episode, has paid us 20 times the average podcast sponsorship amount for the amount of listeners we have, makes up 10% of the revenue we bring in through our podcast. And that really contextualizes like how much of a part sponsorship pays if you're doing it right. If you're not necessarily doing it right, because not everyone has the ability to do so, but if you're in a position where you have a product. Now, I mean, feel free to take this out if you don't want to, but I'm pretty sure you told me you've had a portfolio you've taken on through this podcast, right?
So I've actually come into contact with entrepreneurs, and then as a result, pitching to them essentially my business, which is in the background. So this is like an opportunity for me to not just do a podcast, and I'm really interested in people, and I think that's one of my skills is the curiosity side of things, but I also manage wealthy people's money. Well, the people that are coming onto the podcast, by and large, are wealthy people or will be wealthy people in the future.
So you're monetizing your guests, which is awesome. It's a different approach.
Essentially,
so without realizing it, I'm not going to ask how much you've made, but I can imagine you've made a fair whack from any of those portfolios you take on. That's you monetizing this podcast.
Yeah.
But it's not, some people don't see that as monetizing, just not advertising or sponsorship. But realistically, you doing this podcast is going to provide you with portfolios that then is going to make you a lot of money in the back end.
We actually had this small debate with Dodge when we did an episode with him, because he was talking about monetizing the podcast directly, i.e. how much money have I done an ad, or have YouTube paid me for this podcast? But we completely disagree with that. Because for example, he owned Bournemouth Sevens Festival.
Yeah.
If hypothetically he'd sold 10,000 tickets from podcast listeners, I would all day long say that is monetizing the podcast.
Sure.
Right? It doesn't have to be I upload a podcast to YouTube and YouTube pays me X amount, because then you're going to get very demotivated and think, well, I'm only getting paid 3 or 4 grand a month from YouTube, which is, it's all right for content, but it's costing me a lot of money. And in my business, I could earn a lot more. It's like, yeah, you could just use this as the top of funnel for your business.
Ironically, when I spoke to Dodge recently, he gave the advice that you gave, which was use this as your funnel, use this as your opportunity to get yourself out there. And let's say, for example, in my industry, it is very difficult to get a client to entrust you enough to give you their life savings.
Yeah.
So if they meet you for the first time, you've got to sort of make a judgment call, like a couple of meetings, do I trust this person? Do I not? I can refer you onto an entire podcast of me, how do I conduct myself? How do I speak? What am I interested in? All these different things. My personality and all the information about me is out there in the open right now. If you really want to do your due diligence on me, here it is.
Yeah.
If you had every lead that you get, if you could hypothetically force them to listen to that episode where you're talking about yourself, you're being interviewed, your conversion rate, I'm confident, would skyrocket. And obviously you can't force everyone to listen to that, but I think it's like 11 touch points now. People need to trust someone. And if you've got a podcast, it doesn't even, this is where it becomes even more like, oh, is it directly monetizing? Is it not? If we've got a lead and then they go and listen to our podcast and then we speak to them on a second call, they're a lot more likely to want to work with us. And I've had conversations with people where it feels like I spoke to them 100 times and they know everything about me. And I'm like, yeah, so what's your name again? Because they listen to the podcast. But they're ones that you had that lead anyway, but you're going to convert better with the podcast. So all of these things, and it does make it very hard to track. That's the one frustrating thing, is it can be very hard to track. Even with sponsors, I had this conversation earlier with someone sponsoring a show I work with, and they were like, it's been brilliant, but we've struggled to track everything, which is common. But when you add all those little things in, you're like, holy shit, like actually this is more than paying its way.
Yeah, and you don't have to see the affiliate links, exactly how much they're paying, because like I said earlier on, this podcast does cost me money at the moment. Out of my income every month, I pay some money to do the editing side, to get a studio, but without doubt this will be a high return on investment.
Why did you start it?
Good question. So I've listened to podcasts for 10 years and I feel like I've gained a lot from podcasts. I've learned a lot about the business side, about the mindset side, and all these different things. And then I just sat down, and I've been saying to my girlfriend for a long time, like, I work with really, really cool people. My job, I feel like I'm very, very lucky to do my job, because the majority of people that I work with are go-getters, successful, ambitious, or they're very wealthy. Now, not often that you get to go into multiple meetings a month with people that you look up to, and you're like, wow. And then I wrote a list of people and I said, do I think I've got enough guests through my contacts? And that comes from friends, it comes from family, and it comes from clients. And I looked at that and I just said, like, wow, that number's quite big. It was about 35 different people. That was just the inception of the idea. And then Julia, my girlfriend, just said, why don't you do it? And I've been talking about doing it for such a long time. And I just said, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to start. And she literally went on to Google. She searched, we were in Rome at the time, and she literally searched podcast studio in London and then booked a studio. And she's like, right, I'll be your first guest. We'll go and do this. And I was like, it was that easy? It was that easy to start. And I guess I had created all these complexities about, how to record and how to grow it and all the time I've got to spend. It takes up a lot of time. It takes up money. But it is without doubt the best thing I've ever done. I'm so passionate about this. She told me today, she's like, oh, I'm going to go to volleyball training tonight. I was like, fantastic. I get to spend the evening working on the edits for my podcast. And that is a new passion that I've created. I started this in February this year, and I love what I'm doing on the side. And like, people in work can see the enthusiasm that I have for this. And it's not just the enthusiasm I have for this new passion, but it's like, now it's opening doors to other things. And that wasn't the reason for doing it in the first place. The reason for doing it is because I wanted to, rather than just essentially take from the ecosystem, I wanted to contribute to the ecosystem. I wanted to share the knowledge of these people. And I think that Stephen Bartlett for me was actually quite a pivotal podcast that I was listening to and then became disengaged with. And I felt that the people that he started interviewing were quite relatable, and then they became unrelatable over time. It started to be a bit more clickbaity.
Yeah.
Now, you will not know many of the people that come on my podcast. They are relatable people, and they are people that are achievable. You can literally say, I've got something in common with that person. Therefore, where they are today is where I can get to. And I think that's way more inspirational than the person that has had a business, sold it for hundreds of millions or something, and is now just doing the podcast circuit and almost forgets
Saying the same story over and over again.
Saying the same story over and over again, and almost forgets what it was like those early days. And that's why I love like chatting to you guys now, because you are doing it. You are now in this moment where you are figuring out as you're going along. You're young, ambitious people who want to get to somewhere in the future. And I don't even know if that's going to stop for you guys, if it's going to be a point where you walk away and say, I've made it now, or if it's a continuous journey where you're just growing and growing and growing. And Ambitious Minds is the name of the podcast. It is aimed at ambitious people. And I think that the target audience is sort of these 16 to 35-year-olds who want to continuously improve.
I think what you said about people not knowing who the guests are, there's no denying that makes it harder for you to get new listeners.
And I fully appreciate that as well.
But what it does mean is that if you do get someone in your doors and it is as relatable as you want it to be, and if the content, can't say I've listened to every episode, so if you feel like the content is perfect for that person, your ideal listener, you will retain listeners really well, because it's like you said, it's not the Stephen Bartlett where, this one's relevant, this one's not, this one's relevant. If every single person is like, that's that person who's a few steps ahead of me, then that's so much more valuable to someone. It's just harder to get them in the door in the first place. So if you can get as many people through the door as possible, and just back the content, then people will stick around and it will just compound. I think Dodge does that really, really well.
He's got such a good podcast.
Yeah. Now, a lot of the people he interviews aren't well known. What I would say is they have unbelievable stories that he can also clickbait. Not to lie, but like genuinely, like, this was a gang member who done X, killed all these people. Like, well, shit. Like, I don't know who it is, but now I want to fucking know.
It's a good story.
Yeah, so he does that really well. But then once you listen to a few, like, he's a fantastic host. And you also really buy into not just his hosting style, but the type of guests he's having on. But he doesn't have the names he can clickbait. He has unbelievable stories and does really well with clips because the things people say are great. And he does really well with his titles. But he doesn't have the well-known names that are going to bring loads of people because they've got a massive social media audience.
But gotta give props to Josh as well. He does his YouTube and his edits. He is very good at what he does.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I actually want to get him on as a guest at some point as well, because I heard a bit of his story on one of the episodes where I think he interviewed Dodge about his story, but then you hear about how he has come in and made himself again, like, you guys are talking about indispensable to somebody. And like that is the profile of person I'm trying to appeal to. The people that want to make themselves indispensable to people, because that is going to be how they rocket ship their careers.
100%. We did an interview with Josh.
Did you?
Yeah. Check it out on the train home.
Yeah.
Add to the list.
Yeah. Where do you want to get to with this business?
I've not got a clue. Yeah, I'm just trying to make it to Friday, mate. To be
you said earlier about the goals and people changing their minds all the time. We've both said before, it's like, don't really have goals because things change a lot. And then we were at a training session with someone who's very, very big in the fitness space, in helping PTs become like massive influencers in the fitness space. Now, he said everyone should have these long-term goals, and I kind of challenged it, but then he reframed it to not goals around what you're doing, but like outcomes, things you want to achieve, like holidays, right? I want to have this car. I want to be able to take care of my family. These things that aren't it's not the job I want. It's not the position in the company or the business I want to start. It's actually like the what comes from that. So changing goals from, I want to have £1 million business to, I want to be able to work from anywhere in the world. I want to be able to buy this car. Like the outcomes, and that actually hit really hard. Like that done well for me, because I've never bothered with goals. So I thought, well, last I was a football coach, then I was drop shipping, then I was doing this with selling windows in between. Like there's all sorts of different angles, and I don't want to set any goals because I might do something completely different. So then I'm like, cool, let me change my goals now to, I want to be able to do this thing. How I get there, we'll see. So I think that's, you mentioned where do you want to get to with the business? I don't know, but I have goals of like what I want to be able to do. That's my point.
What is the eventual goal that you want to do? Is it to you have your own business?
Yeah, I definitely want to have my own business and have the freedom to do something from everywhere. If I want to go to Thailand for 2 months, I want to be able to go to Thailand for 2 months. I want to be able to have that sort of freedom. I want to be able to like pay off my parents' mortgage or buy their house. Like that would be awesome. And then it sounds stupid, but I want money to not matter. That's the goal for everyone, right? To be able to just purchase something without even looking twice at the price of it. That's a great feeling, but for me, more so it's the freedom. If you gave me the option between building an empire where you're working 20 hours a day, but you're a Rob Moore, you're like a deca millionaire, loads and loads of money, or you give me the option of like, I'm extremely comfortable, I make a lot of money, might have a nice car, but I also spend a lot of time abroad and do whatever I want, and more of like is it called a social entrepreneur? I forgot the word for it.
Lifestyle
Entrepreneur. That at the moment appeals more to me. So my goals are more around that, of the freedom of doing whatever I want, but being able to take care of the things I need to take care of.
Do you think that that's changed significantly over time from, people wanted to sort of like get these promotions and work for established companies and all these things, but now there definitely seems to be a big pivot now into financial independence and having, working from abroad and these sorts of things?
I think it's a combination of things. Firstly, our generation's lazy as fuck. So lazy. Like, I actually think it's never been easier to be successful.
Yeah.
I was talking to Rob about this the other day. I think most people, if you do like 10% more than the bare minimum, you'll stand out in most places. And I see it like I can go to a company and you can see people that are like a bit younger and they're like, I want to work from home, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And it's just always what they want. But I think that then lends itself well to then the other contributing factor is social media. You see other young people or other entrepreneurs, they're living in Bali, or they're doing this and they're making this, and that you sort of see like, oh, like all the wants I have, which is I want to work from home, I want to be able to tell my boss they're an arsehole, I want to do this, I want to work casual Fridays, whatever it is, I want to have my 3 Starbucks a day. If you're your own boss and you've got an online business, it's like, oh, okay, I can have all of those things, because realistically in the real world, like in employment, you're never going to have those things like, at all. And thanks to social media, you scroll through TikTok, you see, I mean, half of them are probably lying anyway, but like you see like an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, it's like, oh, I made this much money doing this business, or I bought this car from doing this business, I'll do this. And you go, oh, like other avenues are available. And then with cost of living soaring, like you can't save yourself wealthy like at all. Like, you have to figure out a way to earn more money.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it's not like what it used to be, where if you had your head down and you was a good worker, you'd get promoted. You get promoted. Like now, like I think it's like to make the most money, you have to change jobs on 2 years or something like that on average, and you have to earn money going diagonally. Like no company seems to want to give you more money to go up. You have to leave.
You have to leave
to go up, which is irritating to say the least. It's like it's just. I don't know where that comes from, but that seems to be like a new thing. So it's like, well, my current company's not going to pay me more money. Mm-hmm. I can't afford to eat. It's like you see an 18-year-old on TikTok with a Lamborghini or whatever it is. I think like all of those things are contributing factors. You think, yeah, fuck this, I'm going to start my own business.
I think exposure is the biggest one. Like if you rewind, I don't know how many years, but call it 20 years, where everyone's career focused, like have to do what everyone else done, what my parents done. It's because you don't really have that exposure to what else is out there. It's what you get taught at school. It's what you get taught at university. That is your exposure. Now, our generation, you're right, they're very lazy, but I'd also say they're probably going to be the most intelligent generation by far, in the sense of exposed to so much, like falling for like phone scams, for example. I know everyone's more technologically advanced, our sort of generation, but you're exposed to everything that, intelligence-wise, there seems to be a level ahead, because not only have you just seen one perspective, which is your parents' perspective or your teachers, but you've also seen 1,000,001 videos on TikTok about the same thing. So I think just the exposure to, you're in a job, LinkedIn, all these people you can connect with, and people that you can connect with on other social media platforms, that like behind why you might go diagonally.
Perfect example of you just DMing Rob.
Exactly. That opportunity is not something that's going to be as likely a while back. So yeah, I think very lazy generation, but also a very intelligent generation. So it's like, how can I find the quickest and easiest way to do this thing? And then content and brand is just ridiculously influential now in every sense of the word. You spoke earlier about brands doing podcasts versus people. We very briefly spoke before we started recording, but like branded podcasts are shit. People don't want to listen to a corporate brand talk about something, but they'll listen to a person talk about it who has a personality, who might then also generate leads for the corporate brand, like the wealth management company. Do you know? It all kind of adds up. If this was the progressive media podcast,
nobody'd care.
Yeah, exactly. People buy into us as hosts for some reason, and then it generates us more leads. And we noticed when we first started, it was very much more boring. We weren't as
very button up, wasn't it?
Yeah, like we were two lads in our early 20s. It was like we probably need to try and act old and mature, right? So then we done that for a bit, but then when we were like, oh fuck it, let's just be more authentic. And very much now, how we are on the podcast is exactly how we are off the podcast. We saw an uptake in the amount of business we got from doing that. We then got sponsorship because people buy into the authenticity. No one wants to
reviews.
Listen. Yeah, 100%. No one wants to listen to the button-up BBC style interview. Not anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that also going back to your point about it's never been sort of easier to start a business or learn information. I think that the one thing that I've learned over the past is a lot of people, particularly like I think you guys are a bit younger than me, but like collectively in our generations, is they look at the generations before and they say, they were the luckiest generations. They could buy a property, they just sat on that and they become like millionaires or whatever. However, if you look at it, if you reframe it slightly differently and you say they were very lucky because if they left university and got a good career, they're probably like at the top of it now. If they bought a property, which was very cheap, it's worth a lot of money today. There are so many ways now to make money. Businesses now scale faster than ever before because of the internet. If you bought Bitcoin less than 10 years ago, you've made far better returns than 30 years worth of house price growth. So if you're looking in the right areas and exposing yourself, I first came across Bitcoin and Ethereum from a Tim Ferriss podcast, for example. So if you are using the resources that are out there and available to you, all of these free content, podcasts, YouTube, now I think, I can't remember who it was. Actually, funny enough, a guest of Stephen Bartlett's was talking about an MBA now that you can basically learn an MBA on YouTube.
All of like the Harvard courses are online. Fuck. Or you can get into 100 grand's worth of debt, go through like a rigorous application process. All of their courses are online.
That is mental.
Yeah.
When you think about it. And all you're doing then is you're paying probably for the connections at the end of it, or to say...
It's the letterhead, isn't it?
Literally to say, I went to Harvard.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. It's like I said, the exposure to it is making it seem stupid. The school system, that is. Because like you said, you can see everything for free now. There's all these other options. It's not like, here's your one option, you have to do this. And there's still cultures out there where it's expected you go to school, you get a good job, you do it this same way. And when you speak to people like that, it's almost like you want to say, oh, fuck it, like
it's archaic.
Yeah, like do something. You don't have to do it that way. There's so many other ways of doing it. And I'm not sitting here saying like, oh, I've done it, like I'm super successful. But it's clear because of the people we're around, the industry we're in, how many different ways there are of making money. But it all comes from people actually being able to make up their own mind. Well, it's no longer like, oh, this is what you get told, this is how you do it. It's, well, that's what the news is saying, that's what that's saying. But let me look on social media where there's actually a lot more information. And there's always two sides to every story. And I think people are wising up to the fact that, okay, maybe not everything you get told is true.
I know money loves speed. And if you look at traditional education, for one, like if you do a marketing degree, there's basically nothing on social media at all. And realistically, the person teaching it isn't going to be like an influencer or like a big following. Like, there's no courses that touch on podcasting in university. And progressive media has been doing that since 2016. So almost 10 years later, and bear in mind the industry's been around longer than that. It's been around about 15 years. But 10 years later, almost, there's still nothing into mainstream education. So it's like everything you're learning pretty much is outdated. Mm. And it takes so long for it to trickle down to the syllabus. Whereas, you can start a YouTube channel or you can go watch YouTube and learn how to start a certain business. So for example, Rob on his Disruptors podcast controversially interviewed Andrew Tate. And he was really interested into how he made money. So he was saying that Tate's Real World, the membership site thing, does 8 million a month. Right, it's insane, the revenue. But he was intrigued because he's also got a membership site, he's got an information business. So he joined and he's spent a few grand on there. And then he met a bunch of these editors. It's insane. So there's a bunch of these like 16, 17-year-old lads mostly editing other people's podcast content, uploading it to TikTok and YouTube, and getting paid by TikTok and YouTube, and doing thousands of pounds a month through the partner program and the YouTube revenue, chopping up and posting other people's podcast content.
I've seen these before.
Yeah, it's insane. And he was like, there's loads of them. And he's hired some of them to do some of their social clips. They're really good.
Yeah.
And obviously, so, we hire a lot of videographers or editors. And I think one of the best questions you can ask if you're going to hire that person is, what content do you consume? Because if you're interviewing like a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old, like some people would think, oh, I'm young, that's a disadvantage. I haven't been an editor for that long. It's like, yeah, but when you're doing social media, YouTube's like, that's your whole world. Like, I don't care if someone's done cinematography and documentaries. They're not going to get any views on YouTube or TikTok because it's a different skill. So you can ask somebody at 17, 18, like, oh, what content do you consume? Like, do you read? And they're like, fuck no, I scroll through TikTok 3 hours a day. It's like, you're hired.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
you know
Yeah.
what people want to see.
Yeah. And you can give them any form of like long form podcast content or YouTube or content from a streamer, and they'll make clips go viral easily. It doesn't matter about their age. And they'll earn like thousands of pounds, like 10 grand a month. Easy. I say easy. That's competitive, right? That's competitive because there's such a low barrier to entry. There's like more and more people doing it. But we've been introduced to dozens of them, and they're like stressing about their GCSEs, but they're earning more than their parents are, chopping up fucking Andrew Tate content. Like,
that is insane. Simon Squibb actually on a podcast said, you go and do a marketing. He has people come into his business, and he says like they've done marketing degrees at wherever, and he's like, 3 ways you monetize TikTok, and they're like, I don't know, we don't learn that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what are you doing here then?
Yeah. Let me tell you about an ad Coca-Cola run in the 70s.
Literally.
It's more frustrating than broke business coaches.
Yes.
So I'm going to teach you how to start a business, but I'm broke.
Yeah, I've never started a business.
Yeah. We've definitely had people come through like the doors here on our training programs. So I can't afford to do whatever it is, like the option to maybe mentoring or whatever. And he's like, okay, what's your podcast about if there's in the podcast space? Oh, yeah, I'm a business coach. I'm teaching people how to scale businesses. And then you just kind of look at them a bit like, yeah, okay. So you're going to tell me how to make money, but you're broke. Yeah. And there's so much of that out there, like the marketing ones as well. There's loads of marketing people who don't know how to market their own stuff.
Yeah.
It's all theory. These people that know all the theory,
just
but none of the practical.
regurgitate other people's information.
Yeah, literally, which was a large part behind like why we had to do this podcast, because it's like, right, well, we can't be the broke business coach or the business professor who's paid 30 grand a year. We need to actually be practicing what we preach, and unfortunately, there's actually a lot of people doing the similar stuff to us that don't have podcasts. If they do, I've never heard of them, so they must be shit.
Before we finish up, I've got one final question I want to ask you both.
I'm talking.
And it's and it's quite a broad question, but you've interviewed a number of podcasters, and I'm guessing a number of those people are also like business owners, etc. as well. And you've also worked with Rob Moore. What is the key thing that you've learned from some of these people that you've either listened to or worked alongside? One piece of advice or something like that.
I'd say kind of just do it, take action. Like, we've had so many people come through, and this is beyond the podcast, but within this business, come through the doors wanting to learn. You call them 6 months later, they're still trying to come up with their name. Then we've had other people who, kind of similar to what you've done with the podcast, just gone, fuck it, I'm going to launch it. We've got a client like that. Her name's Yvonne. She's awesome. She launched a podcast. No, she thought, I want to start a podcast in June. She came to our training in July. She got sponsorship the day after the training. She paid a lot of money to work with us on a long-term contract. We produce her podcast. She launched it with a shit name. She knows it's a shit name. She kind of wants to change it, but then she's actually smashing it. She's speaking on all sorts of stages now. So she started her own business. Oh, she's also a corporate lawyer with 4 children under the age of 4. So like
smashing it.
And she's just the biggest action taker ever. She just does it. And she was like, I remember speaking to her on the phone. I kind of complimented her on it. She was like, yeah, my husband was saying he couldn't believe how quickly I chose a kitchen. Like, they showed me some kitchen options. She was like, yeah, I'll have that one. And then the salesman was like, this is so unusual. Usually they need like 3 months to decide the color of the cabinet. She was like, no, that'll do, that one. Like, being that person who just okay, let's do this thing. Not the come up with a million ideas, do none of them, which is very easy to do. There was a point in time where we'd come up with a new business idea every day, and they were like, you know what, fuck it, let's actually just do it.
Yeah, I think we've slept on the current one. It's working. I'm just gonna grab. Sorry, I'm trying to look for a quote that perfectly sums this up.
Okay, amazing.
Go quote hunting.
But it's not my fucking phone. So
It's funny because the common theme across almost everyone that I've interviewed so far has been just do it. And if you could, like,
Is it?
Nike have obviously monetized that name, but
Yeah. Got in there early days.
It's just all these successful people that I've had on.
I'm going to try and come up with a different angle then, so it's not the same as everyone else.
yeah, I mean, everybody
go first.
Everybody says like the same stuff, right?
No, but it is, you're just hitting the nail on the head though. Like, you have to start.
Yeah, and one thing that I would say, so I've got two answers. I've got this one, which is a quote from somebody else, and then the thing that I've seen just from the podcast guests we've interviewed and stuff is like, it's like marriage. Like, you don't win by getting married. You win by, like, not getting divorced. And it's like most businesses the same thing. Like, we've seen some that will be, a couple of years do really well. Some took 10 years. Some got, like, whatever. It's like, but they all just like keep going. And I'll give Rob his flowers on that with, like, he's posted to every social media channel every day for about 14 years without fail. A new one comes out, Threads, day one. Clubhouse comes out, day one. It fucking prolific. And what happens is it sort of seesaws. So, like, Facebook will do really well, and then all your reach on Instagram's gone. But he doesn't get disheartened. He still carries on Instagram. It's like, YouTube got shadow banned, had a bad guest. Doesn't matter. Let's pivot our content around. Let's try and find something that's a bit more, family friendly. So YouTube forgives us. Do that. And he's been prolific. But that's why he's always continued to grow. Because even though he's not like a full-time creator as such, he's got all these other businesses, most people don't get to his size online whilst doing the other stuff. Normally the really big creators are like all in on that. And it's just prolific. And, Dodge is the same. A lot of the people we've interviewed, it's like they just don't stop, right? So obviously getting started is an important thing, but it's just like, don't expect overnight success. But here's a really good one. So my favorite podcast is called My First Million. Sean Puri is.
You hadn't mentioned that, actually. That's the first time you mentioned.
Gotta give him a plug, man. Is this because I said I'm taller? Here you go. So this is about getting outside of your comfort zone. Don't follow what most people do because you don't want the results most people get. The average person is obese, likely to be divorced, and has less than 1K in the bank. Feels safe to do what everyone else is doing, but it's actually a terrible decision.
Yeah, do not be the average.
Yeah.
Because the average is shit.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, most people want to start a business or do this or do that, and it's like all the people around them that basically they're just being selfish. They don't want your business to fail because then they might have to look after you. Whereas, like, when Ash was like had like a bit of a nervous moment about something, I said, I will sleep at my house. Like, we're doing this business and we're working from Bali. Like
I'll sleep on the beach.
You have no choice. Like, and I think it just comes from like a selfish point from them, or it's an insecurity they're projecting onto you, and you scare them a little bit because they feel shit that they don't have the courage to do that thing.
This is a big thing, I think, that even when I said about doing the podcast to people and they turned around and said, oh, it's a saturated market. It's like, I think this is the issue with the British culture. You go in America, I think, and then you get a completely different response. Oh man, that's amazing. Whereas here it's a bit like, oh, if that's a saturated market, why would you want to do that? Another white guy with a podcast. And it's like, come on, give me a fucking break. I'm doing something.
Oh, you do actually. Yes,
actually, yeah.
Yeah, my socials, yeah.
They need to stop making mic so accessible.
Yeah. Oh, I got that as well on TikTok the other day. You should start taxing microphones. I got.
Well, here's the thing on the how competitive a market is, right? So, Cold War, Russia, America, first person on the moon. Basically, as soon as America lands on the moon, like, nothing happens with space travel, like, at all. And then in the last 5 years, you've got Branson, Musk, and Amazon guy, Jeff Bezos. All three of them have got space travel / rocket companies that are all worth multiple billions. Mm-hmm. It's like, once the first person's done it, you'd think, well, why would I? They're 5 years ahead. They've already got it. All the countries will give them contracts. There's no room for me. It's like, bullshit. It's not true. And it's just really, really difficult, which is why the ones that do get that far become billion-dollar companies. Yeah. Basically, you need one contract to become a billion-dollar company in that space, right? So it's like, I feel like when people say something's saturated, it is just them admitting that they're lazy and aren't willing to work hard enough. Because also, like, how saturated is being a professional footballer? But it doesn't stop, like, millions
the
of...
entire country.
Yeah.
Or, like, the entire all of South America wanting to be one.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the quality of player is so high now, because so many people want to do it. The ones that just work harder or have, you know, that extra opportunity, whatever, get to, like, that level.
Yeah.
Right? So, I don't know. I think it's just people being lazy.
Yeah, that's... It's an interesting point about space travel as well. And I was having this conversation literally this weekend. And it's funny how we often look down on people with, you know, billions of pounds, you know, that bring in an ultra high net worth tax or whatever, tax the rich. But those have been the people that have taken us into a new dimension. And we can even go as far back as like water sanitation. I'm pretty sure that it was the wealthy people didn't want to be surrounded by their own like sewage and stuff, so they paid for like sewage systems and stuff like this. They wanted clean water to come through, and then all of a sudden it becomes more accessible because it's being done, and then you've got more people working on it, and it brings the average cost down. It becomes accessible to everybody. Then you've got people like Elon Musk turns around and says, "I've got billions of pounds from my electric car business. Now I want to try to send a rocket into space and then it come back down." And now that has completely changed space travel, because it would have cost billions for one launch to send one shuttle up there, which wouldn't have returned in its same form. Now they're sending rocket ships to go up and back down. It's a reusable. And all of a sudden now, then you've got people competing to make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Now with interplanetary exploration is going to be something that becomes something in the future because of people like Elon Musk.
Yeah. Well, he sat in front of Congress, didn't he? He said, Congress said, it costs about $40 billion to cure world hunger. He said, okay, make a plan and I'll give you the money.
Yeah, they couldn't.
They couldn't come up with a plan.
Yeah.
And a few months later, he then buys Twitter for about $45 billion. It's like, he wasn't lying about the money.
Yeah.
He was like, okay, what's the next issue? Freedom of speech. Cool, I'll fix that instead of world hunger.
Yeah.
So, first of all, he is my favorite marketer of all time, because he's somehow rebranded having 12 kids from 7 different women as like good of humanity. Like,
says a lot about you, mate.
Yeah. It's like, that's
Whoa,
a good,
go ahead.
he doesn't get much shit for that. But also,
isn't one of them named like
it's
after
like letters and dashes?
Yeah,
Mad.
like a robot.
Yeah. But I like him, and I think a lot of them, realistically, you can say Jeff Bezos, absolute arsehole, worth billions, doesn't give away. First of all, they'll all give a load to charity just purely through opening doors and getting their tax bill down. But you look at somebody who did like a gap year in South America building wells, and you go, oh, they're a great person, but he's an arsehole. It's like, yeah, but he could be an arsehole from his desk in Seattle, make billions of dollars, and then pay for 10,000 people to go build those wells whilst employing people at the same time. So I do think they get a bit of a hard time, and I think the UK needs to look after their billionaires a lot better.
Yeah.
I interviewed Alfie Best, nicknamed like the Gypsy Billionaire, on stage. He's gone to Monaco. All of his friends are in Monaco because he kept getting investigated by HMRC for tax, and he basically finally spoke to one of the agents, and they said, oh yeah, the top 50 or the top 100 people,
That's right, yeah.
they never come off the list. We just always, just like, so we're just always presumed guilty of this thing, but we generate 90% of the economy amongst those like 100 people. He's like, stop it or I'll leave.
Yeah.
And they're like, no. So I left. And he said one of his good friends, I think he was like in the top 5. He didn't say who it was, top 5. He left for Monaco like 15 years ago. And he said, I think I've had enough. I want to come back to the UK. And they're like, sure, you can. One time, £50 million tax bill. Will clear all of your previous debts from you not being here over the last 15 years. So fuck yeah, I'll stay here then. And you can see why so many people are flocking to Dubai or Monaco and all these places. Like, you can't blame them.
Yeah, 1% of the top 1% pay 30% of the taxes. And also, not only that, but they probably also employ the majority of the people who then pay the taxes also.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you need to encourage it. Like, because like you said with space travel, like now there's competition, things get cheaper for the everyday person.
Yeah.
Competition's good.
Yeah.
But if you don't have any of the players, it's boring. It's like Saudi paying for Ronaldo to go out there. It's like, yeah, but he's playing against a bunch of losers. Like, it's not fun. Like, it's only fun when there's actually competition there. So you got to look after it and make sure all of the top players are in your country. And that's why Dubai's doing so well.
Yeah, a lot of my friends are now moving out there. And it's a shame because I think that with the new government coming in, you know, hopefully that creates some stability, but we also know it's going to create higher taxes. And I think to sort of full circle, to come back to what you both said at the start, the only way that you can not circumvent, but you can pay less tax and have more in your pocket is having your own business now.
Yeah.
And income is taxed. It always has been, and it continue. It's the easiest way for the governments to tax. It's not the fairest way because you're taxing labor and not assets. However, if you are ambitious, why would you want to give up 40% of your taxes, probably at a minimum, including national insurance, to the government, and you feel like I'm not getting much back?
Yeah, because the roads are crap and you can't get in the NHS. So it's like, it's basically, I think we need to make a decision of, do you go where it's like, okay, higher VAT, push tourism, lower income tax, and basically make money through an economy where people are spending? Or do you up taxes a lot more than they are and be more similar to a lot of the Scandinavian countries where their public sector is phenomenal? Like great transport, great healthcare, great education, all these things. Because we're miles behind them. And we're in this really ugly purgatory where we're like, neither. It's like, it's not great to thrive as a business owner here, but also just using any essentials is just not worth it.
Public services are terrible.
Dreadful. And so we're like paying a bit too much tax for what we're getting.
Yeah.
And like, so it's like, but not enough to have like much better things. So I don't know. I'm also an idiot, so don't listen to me, but I can see why people are moving.
Yeah, but I don't, you know, I don't say that as a serious comment. You're not an idiot because you are taking just these steps, which is what, again, sort of encompassing this podcast that I want to encourage other people to do. Explore options. You know, our career's the most obvious route for you to become successful and become financially independent, or whatever your goals will be. Or is it starting a business? People that start businesses, I heard something on a podcast the other day, which was you end up, the people who are A-star students end up being employed by the people who are C-level students. And like that, and even if someone turns around and says, I'm an idiot, I'm not smart, well, that doesn't matter. That is not, that's just because the school system judges it in that way. Go out and figure stuff out, build businesses, and you will become so much more successful, in my opinion, than you will if you just go and work in a 9-to-5 job, go home and sort of watch Love Island at the end of it.
True. Well,
sorry, mate.
I was just saying, like, there's a few of us that have a coffee every morning, right? And all of us are starting our own businesses. And one of our friends, he's in property and he's having like a really hard time. Like deals keep falling out of bed for him, and it's like really annoying. He's like, this is way harder than I thought. I was like, realistically, ignorance is the best thing now. Like, if we realized how hard the business was going to be before, 0% chance it would have started.
Yeah.
0% chance.
But how much fun have you had doing it?
Oh, it's great.
And what was it you said about, you spoke about it earlier through a conversation with someone else. The harder something is, the less likely someone else is going to replicate it. I think Hormozy says it in like the best ways. I get excited the harder something is.
Yeah.
Because I know no one else is going to do it.
Yeah.
And it just makes you think, shit, fair point.
We have a really strong moat around our business, essentially, on the sponsorship side. So we negotiate sponsorship deals for podcasters, and brands are essentially a broker in the middle. And finding the brand, first of all, you've got to have the years experience in the podcast space to find what fits and have a good ad that works and a bunch of other things. But also finding the brands is just like an incredible amount of manual labor of outreach. And there's so much you can do with automation of like building lists, but like it is a very, very manual job. And I was talking about like the short form video editors. It's like, yeah, there's like a fair few of them that made like 5-10 grand a month, and that's great. But then there's no barrier to entry. So now the market is absolutely flooded. It's like very, very weak moat. Your business isn't very sustainable. But the thing that I kept reminding us in like the first few weeks, getting like no responses, like brilliant. Like feels like shit now, But I know most people won't push past this bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you know something's going to be really, really difficult, most people won't start. And then if they start ignorantly and it's really, really difficult, most people will then stop at that point. So really, we're going to dominate this niche if we stay in it and we go all in, because one, we're the earliest. There's different variations, but nobody doing exactly what we're doing. And the fact it's really difficult means no one's going to try and steal it from us. It's a win.
Yeah.
Exactly. You mentioned the coffee thing this morning, and going back to what you were saying, like the one piece of advice from being around people, it is just who you're around. And I don't know whose quote it is, but you're some of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true, because I've had experiences where I've met up with old friends as a group, and I was sat with them, and I have a really, really close friend. And then I was in that group kind of because of him.
Mm-hmm.
But then he's doing really well for himself. He's smashing it in like the cybersecurity space. However, the rest of the friends group was like, yeah, so what are you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm still at uni. Okay, what are you doing? I'm still working at the same corner shop. And then I quickly realized, like I've got nothing against these people, but like, I don't want to spend time with any of these. And it was a good chance for me to step outside and be like, oh, actually, I'm doing quite well. Because also the thing is, when you spend a lot of time with people doing really well, is you feel like you're doing shit sometimes. Because you're like, fuck, look at how he's doing. It's like when you moan, it'd be like, oh, like, I ain't got enough money. Or like, they're doing this much better. And I'm looking at like, look at the house, the car you've got, the money you've got. I'm like, you do realize like you're 24, like you're not doing that bad. And then it's easy for someone to look at me the same way. But then when you're around those people doing well, it's great, because you're just constantly punching up, constantly trying to do better. And even if it's not people doing better than you, but trying to do the same thing as you, you're all breathing the same experience, right? Like he talked about our friend in property. He's very new to it, but we're all doing the same thing. And it's because of being around those people, you're willing to take more risks, because people are encouraging you, rather than the traditional like, oh no, make sure you stay in your job, you get a job, you do this thing. The only one job where I'd say it kind of goes against everything is sales, because I reckon on average a salesperson has a lower IQ than most people, but it's the highest paying job in the world, bar none. It's probably one of the only jobs where you can make a ridiculous amount of money employed. Yet the barrier to entry is lower than any other job. Mm-hmm. I got a job selling windows, and they practically offered me the job before I'd even started the interview. Like, it's so easy to get a job in sales. It's not easy once you're in there, but to get an opportunity in that space is easy. That if you can be good at sales, and you don't need to be clever to be good at sales, then you can make a ridiculous amount of money. And that basically, sales goes against everything that the education system is.
There is another job. So there was a whole list, I think got really popular on like Twitter, which is like the top 100 companies to work for if you wanted to be a millionaire. Because basically, if you were like employee 1 up to 1,000 at Facebook and you worked there 2 years, you'd have been a millionaire just through stock. And there's like all of these companies that's like, you could have been like the bottom of the food chain at like Uber. But if you were employee number 300, it's like, cool, you got a cool 10 mil in stock. Like, and it's like, sometimes I do look at business, I'm like, this is really rewarding, but it's really hard. And I could have just flown under the radar at like a middle management in one of these companies had I been born in like Silicon Valley.
Yeah. But that is also a risk, right? So those people have joined a company which has a very few number of employees. I worked for a company that used to be a startup, and the people that were there were on significantly more than I was on, because they'd just been there from the start. And then they also got stock options. Now, those are the people that first went to work for this company. Once it was big and established and eventually listed, at this point, they were just bringing people in to do, like client service roles or whatever.
Yeah.
But the people that took the risk, the people that were employee like 0 to 50, they were rewarded, because who the fuck comes out of university and says, I know what I want to do. I want to go and work for a company that might not be able to pay my salary in 3 months' time.
Yeah.
Priestley talks about it a lot, doesn't he? He said to go work for an entrepreneur, because that's exactly what he'd done. He worked in a startup as like 3 people in it or something like that. And he basically learned a lot about entrepreneurship without taking the risk himself, to the point that he goes, cool, I'm ready to do this myself now. So if you're like you want to be an entrepreneur, but it's maybe a step too far, I think working for a startup or an entrepreneur where you're really heavily involved because it's very small and you actually kind of get to feel it and experience it is massive.
Yeah, and you've benefited from that as well. You've come to work for someone who is an entrepreneur, smashing it, and you become very close to that person. You can learn from them, and now both of you are then trying to start your own ventures and go off and, but that being around those people, the average of the 5 people you're closest with, gives you the confidence, gives you the inspiration to go and do that.
100%. I'm 25, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering why you looked at me like, how dare you disrespect me?
So what are you, 24, 25?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
So
thought I
like,
was 23. I'm not. I'm 24.
and I came across your content from somebody else from Dodge, but then YouTube, and now I go onto YouTube and say like, how do I grow my podcast and how do I get more listeners and all these sorts. And you guys are coming up, and that's amazing that your circle that you've created, that your influence, your web that you've created online, has now given you so many opportunities. And even like messaging you, like followed you on LinkedIn, just commented on one of your posts or whatever. Then you also then DM'd me.
Yeah.
This could be a potential business partner or whatever, because you were looking for my company to sponsor one of your other podcasts, and you create these networks all the time if you're looking for opportunities.
Absolutely.
Which it's just having your eyes open to it.
Yeah, 100%. And like it's so hard to do for a lot of people, but you have to just put yourself out there all the time. You have to just continue, believe the process, that if you just network with as many people as possible, if you surround yourself with successful people, by and large, on average, you are probably also going to be, you're certainly going to be on that trajectory more than someone who's not doing all those things, goes home and watches Love Island, for example. So guys, you are absolutely killing it. And I've enjoyed this conversation. We could talk for a lot longer, to be honest with you. We could just brainstorm about business and, what's wrong with the world. But
Can I try to
do an hour on podcasting?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
So all the people that you've met through your wealth management, what's like a really common theme in how they made their money?
Niche businesses.
Really? Like waste management, something boring.
Even weirder than that.
Really?
We've got a client who manufactures handcuffs. Biggest, not in the Ann Summers way, but in the biggest contractor is like the Metropolitan Police.
Oh, wow.
One person makes furniture exclusively for caravans.